Book 1, Chapters 1 and 2 of The Blue Lagoon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Adrian Praetzellis. The Blue Lagoon by Vere Stacpoole. Book 1, Chapter 1. Where the Slush Lamp Burns. Mr. Button was seated on a sea-chest with a fiddle under his left ear. He was playing the Shan Van Vo and accompanying the tune, punctuating it with blows of his left heel on the forecastle deck. "Oh, the French are in the bay," says the Shan Van Vo. He was dressed in dungaree trousers, a striped shirt and a jacket blaze green in parts from the influence of sun and salt. A typical old shellback, round-shouldered, hooked-of-finger, a figure with strong hints of a crab about it. His face was like a moon seen red through tropical mists, and as he played it wore an expression of strained attention, as though the fiddle were telling him tales much more marvellous than the old bald statement about Bantry Bay. Left-handed Pat was his forecastle name, not because he was left-handed, but simply because everything he did wrong, or nearly so. Reefing or furling or handling a slush tub, if a mistake was to be made, he made it. He was a Celt, and all the salt seas that had flowed between him and Connaught these 40 years and more had not washed the Celtic element from his blood, nor the belief in fairies from his soul. The Celtic nature is a fast dye, and Mr. Button's nature was such that, though he had been shanghaied by Larry Marr in 'Frisco, though he had got drunk in most parts of the world, though he had sailed with Yankee captains and been manhandled by Yankee mates, he still carried his fairies about with him. They, and a very large stock of original innocence. Nearly over the musician's head swung a hammock, from which hung a leg. Other hammocks hanging in the semi-gloom called up suggestions of lemurs and arboreal bats. The swinging kerosene lamp cast its light forward past the heel of the bowsprit to the nightheads, lighting here a naked foot hanging over the side of a bunk, here a face from which protruded a pipe, here a breast covered with dark mossy hair, here an arm tattooed. It was in the days before double topsail yards had reduced ships' crews, and the forecastle of the Northumberland had a full company, a crowd of packet-rats such as is often to be found on a Cape Horner. Dutchmen, Americans, men who were farm labourers and tending pigs in Ohio 3 months back, old seasoned sailors like Paddy Button, a mixture of the best and the worst of the earth, such as you find nowhere else in so small a space as in a ship's forecastle. The Northumberland had experienced a terrible rounding of the Horn. Bound from New Orleans to 'Frisco, she had spent 30 days battling with headwinds and storms. Down there, where the seas are so vast that 3 waves may cover with their amplitude more than a mile of sea space, 30 days she had passed off Cape Stiff, and just now, at the moment of this story, she was locked in a calm south of the line. Mr. Button finished his tune with a sweep of the bow, and drew his right coat sleeve across his forehead. Then he took out a sooty pipe, filled it with tobacco, and lit it. "Patrick," drawled a voice from the hammock above, from which depended the leg, "what was that yarn you was beginning to spin to-night, 'bout a lip me dawn?" "A which me dawn?" asked Mr. Button, cocking his eye up at the bottom of the hammock, while he held the match to his pipe. "It was about a green thing," came a sleepy Dutch voice from a bunk. "Oh, a leprechaun, you mean? Sure, me mother's sister had one down in Connaught." "What was it like?" asked the dreamy Dutch voice. a voice seemingly possessed by the calm that had made the sea like a mirror for the last 3 days, reducing the whole ship's company meanwhile to the level of wasters. "Like? Sure, it was like a leprechaun. What else would it be like?" "What like was that?" persisted the voice. "It was like a little man, no bigger than a big forked radish, and as green as a cabbage. Me aunt had one in her house down in Connaught in the old days. Ah, musha, musha, the old days, the old days. Now you may believe me or believe me not, but you could have put him in your pocket, and the grass-green head of him wouldn't more than have stuck out. She kept him in a cupboard, and out of the cupboard he'd pop if it was a crack open, and into the milk pans he'd be, or under the beds, or pulling the stool from under you, or at some other diversion. He'd chase the pig, the cratur, till it be all ribs like an old umbrella with the fright, and as thin as the greyhound with the running by the morning. He'd addle the eggs so the cocks and hens wouldn't know what they was after, with the chickens coming out with 2 heads on them, and 27 legs fore and aft. And you'd start to chase him, and then it'd be mainsail haul, and away he'd go, you behind him, till you landed tail over snout in a ditch, and he'd be back in the cupboard." "He was a troll," murmured the Dutch voice. "I'm telling you, he was a leprechaun, and there's no knowing the divilments he'd be up to. He'd pull the cabbage, maybe, out of the pot boiling on the fire, furnish your eyes, and baste you in the face with it. And then, maybe, you'd hold out your fist to him, and he'd put a golden sovereign in it." "Wisht he was here," murmured a voice from a bunk near the night heads. "Patrick," drawled the voice from the hammock above, "what'd you do first if you found yourself with £20 in your pocket?" "What's the use of asking me?" replied Mr Button. "What's the use of £20 to a seaman at sea, where the grog's all water and the beef's all horse? Give it ashore, and you'd see what I'd do with it." "I guess the nearest grog shop keeper wouldn't see you coming for dust," said a voice from Ohio. "He would not," said Mr Button, "nor you after me. Be damned to the grog and them that sells it." "It's all darned easy to talk," said Ohio. "You curse the grog at sea when you can't get it. Set you ashore and you're bung full." "I like me drunk," said Mr Button. "I'm free to admit, and I'm the divil when it's in me, and it'll be the end of me yet. Oh, me old mother was a liar. Pat, she says, first time I came home from sea, rolling, 'Storms you may escape, and women you may escape, but the poteen'll have you.' 40 year ago, 40 year ago." "Well," said Ohio, "it hasn't had you yet." "No," replied Mr Button, "but it will." Chapter 2. Under the Stars. It was a wonderful night up on deck, filled with all the majesty and beauty of starlight and a tropical calm. The Pacific slept. A vast, vague swell flowing from far away down south under the night lifted the Northumberland on its undulations to the rattling sound of the reef points and the occasional creak of the rudder, whilst overhead, near the fiery arch of the Milky Way, hung the Southern Cross like a broken kite. Stars in the sky, stars in the sea, stars by the million and the million. So many lamps ablaze that the firmament filled the mind with the idea of a vast and populous city. Yet from all that living and flashing splendour, not a sound. Down in the cabin, or saloon as it was called by courtesy, were seated the 3 passengers of the ship, 1 reading at the table, 2 playing on the floor. The man at the table, Arthur Lestrange, was seated with his large, deep-sunken eyes fixed on a book. He was most evidently in consumption, very near indeed to reaping the last of that last and most desperate remedy, a long sea voyage. Emmeline Lestrange, his little niece, 8 years of age, a mysterious mite, small for her age, with thoughts of her own, wide-pupilled eyes that seemed the doors for visions, and a face that seemed just to have peeped into this world for a moment, ere it was as suddenly withdrawn, sat in a corner, nursing something in her arms, and rocking herself to the tune of her own thoughts. Dick, Lestrange's little son, 8 and a bit, was somewhere under the table. They were Bostonians bound for San Francisco, or rather for the sun and splendour of Los Angeles, where Lestrange had bought a small estate, hoping there to enjoy the life whose lease would be renewed by the long sea voyage. As he sat reading, the cabin door opened, and appeared an angular female form. This was Mrs. Stannard, the stewardess, and Mrs. Stannard meant bedtime. "Dicky," said Mr. Lestrange, closing his book and raising the tablecloth a few inches, "bedtime." "Oh, not yet, Daddy," came a sleep-frightened voice from under the table. "I ain't ready. I dunno want to go to bed. Hiya!" Stannard, who knew her work, had stooped under the table, seized him by the foot, and hauled him out, kicking and fighting and blubbering all at the same time. As for Emmeline, she, having glanced up and recognised the inevitable, rose to her feet, and holding the hideous rag doll that she had been nursing, head down and dangling on one hand, she stood waiting till Dicky, after a few last perfunctory bellows, suddenly dried his eyes and held up a tear-wet face for his father to kiss. Then she presented her brow solemnly to her uncle, received a kiss, and vanished, led by the hand into a cabin on the port side of the saloon. Mr. Lestrange returned to his book, but he had not read for long when the cabin door was opened, and Emmeline, in her nightdress, reappeared, holding a brown paper parcel in her hand, a parcel of about the same size as the book you are reading. "My box," said she, and as she spoke, holding it up as if to prove its safety, the little plain face altered to the face of an angel. She had smiled. When Emmeline Lestrange smiled, it was absolutely as if the light of paradise had suddenly flashed upon her face. The happiest form of childish beauty suddenly appeared before your eyes, dazzled them, and was gone. Then she vanished with her box, and Mr. Lestrange resumed his book. This box of Emmeline's, I may say in parenthesis, had given more trouble aboard ship than all the rest of the passengers' luggage put together. It had been presented to her on her departure from Boston by a lady friend, and what it contained was a dark secret to all on board, save its owner and her uncle. She was a woman, or at least the beginning of a woman, yet she kept this secret to herself, a fact which you will please note. The trouble of the thing was that it was frequently being lost. Suspecting herself maybe as an unpractical dreamer in a world filled with robbers, she would cart it about with her for safety, sit down behind a coil of rope, and fall into a fit of abstraction, be recalled to life by the evolutions of the crew reefing or furling or what not, rise to superintend the operations, and then suddenly find she had lost her box. Then she would absolutely haunt the ship. Wide-eyed and distressed of face, she would wander hither and thither, peeping into the galley, peeping down the forescuttle, never uttering a word or a wail, searching like an uneasy ghost, but dumb. She seemed ashamed to tell of her loss, ashamed to let anyone know of it, but everyone knew of it directly they saw her, to use Mr. Button's expression, on the wander, and everyone hunted for it. Strangely enough, it was Paddy Button who usually found it. He, who was always doing the wrong thing in the eyes of men, generally did the right thing in the eyes of children. Children, in fact, when they could get at Mr. Button, went for him con amore. He was attractive to them as a Punch and Judy show or a German band, almost. Mr. Lestrange, after a while, closed the book he was reading, looked around him, and sighed. The cabin of the Northumberland was a cheerful enough place, pierced by the polished shaft of the mizzen-mast, carpeted with an Axminster carpet, and garnished with mirrors let into the white pine panelling. Lestrange was staring at the reflection of his own face in one of these mirrors, fixed just opposite to where he sat. His emaciation was terrible, and it was just perhaps at this moment that he first recognised the fact that he must not only die, but die soon. He turned from the mirror and sat for a while with his chin resting upon his hand, and his eyes fixed upon an ink spot upon the tablecloth. Then he arose, and crossing the cabin, climbed laboriously up the companionway to the deck. As he leaned against the bulwark rail to recover his breath, the splendour and beauty of the southern night struck him to the heart with a cruel pang. He took his seat on a deck chair and gazed up at the Milky Way, that great triumphal arch built of suns that the dawn would sweep away like a dream. In the Milky Way, near the Southern Cross, occurs a terrible circular abyss, the coal sack. So sharply defined is it, so suggestive of a void and bottomless cavern, that the contemplation of it afflicts the imaginative mind with vertigo. To the naked eye it is as black and as dismal as death, but the small telescope reveals it beautiful and populous with stars. Lestrange's eyes travelled from this mystery to the burning cross, and the nameless and numberless stars reaching to the sea-line, where they paled and vanished in the light of the rising moon. Then he became aware of a figure promenading on the quarter-deck. It was the old man. A sea captain is always the old man, be his age whatever it may. Captain Lafarge's age might have been 45. He was a sailor of the Jean Bart type, of French descent, but a naturalised American. "I don't know where the wind's gone," said the captain as he drew near the man in the deck chair. "I guess it's blown a hole in the firmament and escaped somewheres to the back of beyond." "It's been a long voyage," said Lestrange, "and I'm thinking, Captain, it will be a very long voyage for me. My port's not Frisco. I feel it." "Don't you be thinking that sort of thing," said the other, taking his seat in a chair close by. "There's no manner of use forecasting the weather a month ahead. Now we're in warm latitudes, your glass will rise steadily, and you'll be as right and spry as any of us before we fetch the Golden Gates." "I'm thinking about the children," said Lestrange, seeming not to hear the captain's words. "Should anything happen to me before we reach port, I should like you to do something for me. It's only this. Dispose of my body without the children knowing. It has been in my mind to ask you this for some days. Captain, those children know nothing of death." Lafarge moved uneasily in his chair. "Little Emmeline's mother died when she was 2. Her father, my brother, died before she was born. Dicky never knew a mother. She died giving him birth. My God, Captain, death has laid a heavy hand on my family. Can you wonder that I have hid his very name from those 2 creatures that I love?" "Aye, aye," said Lafarge. "It's sad, it's sad." "When I was quite a child," went on Lestrange, "a child no older than Dicky, my nurse used to terrify me with tales about dead people. I was told I'd go to hell when I died if I wasn't a good child. I cannot tell you how much that has poisoned my life. For the thoughts we think in childhood, Captain, are the fathers of the thoughts we think when we are grown up. And can a diseased father have healthy children? I guess not. So I just said when these two tiny creatures came into my care that I would do all in my power to protect them from the terrors of life, or rather, I should say, from the terror of death. I don't know whether I have done right, but I have done it for the best. They had a cat, and one day Dicky came to me and said, "Father, Pussy's in the garden asleep, and I can't wake her." So I just took him out for a walk. There was a circus in town, and I took him to it. It so filled his mind that he quite forgot the cat. Next day he asked for her. I did not tell him she was buried in the garden. I just said she must have run away. In a week he had forgotten all about her. Children soon forget. "Aye, that's true," said the sea captain. "But 'pears to me they must learn some time that they've got to die." Should I pay the penalty before we reached land, and be cast into that great vast sea, I would not wish the children's dreams to be haunted by the thought. Just tell them I've gone aboard another ship. You will take them back to Boston. I have here in a letter the name of a lady who will care for them. Dicky will be well off, as far as worldly goods are concerned, and so will Emmeline. Just tell them I've gone on board another ship. Children soon forget. "I'll do what you ask," said the seaman. The moon was over the horizon now, and the Northumberland lay adrift in a river of silver. Every spar was distinct. Every reef point on the great sails and the deck lay like spaces of frost, cut by shadows black as ebony. As the two men sat without speaking, thinking their own thoughts, a little white figure emerged from the saloon hatch. It was Emmeline. She was a professed sleepwalker, a past mistress of the art. Lestrange put his finger to his lips, took off his shoes, and silently followed her. She searched behind a coil of rope. She tried to open the galley door. Hither and thither she wandered, wide-eyed and troubled of face, till at last, in the shadow of the hen-coop, she found her visionary treasure. Then back she came, holding up her little nightdress with one hand so as not to trip, and vanished down the saloon companion very hurriedly, as if anxious to get back to bed. Her uncle close behind, with one hand outstretched so as to catch her in case she stumbled. End of chapter 2.